Hi guys, I wanted to talk to you about today's lab. It's kind of a confusing one because we can't actually do it. But the main point of this lab is to kind of understand how adaptations are going to allow for organisms to be better adapted to their environment. And so the major portion of this lab would be spent, if we were in the actual lab, doing these experiments where we would have some type of beans and seeds of different sorts. I don't have any seeds or beans at my house, so I'm using beads. And you'd have kind of different utensils that we would use as beaks, okay? Because our major system that we're using today is going to be Darwin's finches. And so Darwin's finches, there are multiple different types, and they all have different beaks that are going to be adapted for different types of seeds or food types. So what I want to show you kind of how this would actually work is I have a couple different types of utensils. So some giant tongs. I have two spoons. I have a set of tweezers, and I have 2 knives. Okay, usually we only use kind of forks, spoons, knives, and tweezers, but I just thought I would mix it up to do this. And so in lab, what we would do is we'd give each of you a different utensil, and we would put 200 seeds in some type of container. We sometimes do this actually outside, and we would put it in the grass, so it would be a little bit harder and would mimic kind of a more natural situation. But what we would do is each of these different beads would be worth a different type of amount of calories. And so some of them are going to have kind of a large amount of calories. We can say that really big beads are going to be big calories. Smaller beads are going to be worth less calories. And depending on the bird and we are the birds, depending on the different types of utensils, you're going to be able to pick up different types of beads differently. So for example, spoons are generally a pretty good one. They're not too difficult, so you would kind of grab them up and then, oops, maybe they are a little more difficult. And so we would have some of you using spoons to grab the different beads. Some of you would be using tweezers. And so as you can see, these tweezers will not pick up certain beads because they're too big. So I can't pick this one up. I can pick up things that are a little bit smaller. This might actually even be, smaller beads are gonna be a lot easier for this one. But again, there's gonna be kind of a size limit to what types of beads I can pick up. Knives are gonna be pretty difficult. They are not super easy to maneuver. And so in lab, when we have knives, that person usually just does the worst because it's just pretty difficult to use 2 knives. And then if we have kind of my big tongs, maybe I can take multiple beads at a time. And so this could be kind of a really good one, but maybe it'd be a little bit harder to get some of the smaller beads. Okay, and even like the really small ones, I don't really have any really small ones in here, but those would be really difficult for me to get. So the main point of this is to realize that there are going to be certain tools that we're using that are going to be better than others. And you can think of that as there's going to be certain types of beaks that are going to do better for different types of food. And through the process of evolution and natural selection, birds are going to be adapted to feed on a specific type of food. So the beak of birds that are going to eat really big seeds are going to have to be large, and they're going to have to be strong, because in order to pick this up, you have to have a beak that's big enough. And let's just pretend that this is a nut. It would have to be really strong so we can crack this open. But other birds can have smaller beaks that'll be able to handle the little small ones. So maybe these little small ones are very difficult for birds with big beaks to pick up, but birds with smaller beaks are gonna do really well with these, okay? So you can go through the lab and we have kind of explained how you would fill out these different charts. So we have lots of different charts on the lab, and if you look in your lab manual. So what you would do is you'd have these different rounds where each individual would have their specific type of tool, and they would kind of collect as many seeds as possible, count them out, and kind of see which utensil was the best. Now, I want to go through the questions. Obviously, sorry, my cat is trying to eat my beads. Let me just cover them. So I want to go through the questions, and these are obviously kind of hard to answer on your own if you don't actually do the experiment, but I wanted to talk about how we would answer these. Okay, and so the first one says which type of seed was the most valuable in terms of the number of calories. And so when we do this experiment, we would then tell you, which specific seed type would be worth the most calories. Okay, and so if we're looking back at these, we'll pretend that the large kind of crystal-like ones are going to be worth 10 calories each. The little ones are going to be worth 2 calories each. And these like square ones are going to be worth maybe 1 calorie. I'm just making this stuff up. So when you're actually going after the different types of seeds, you could potentially select the ones that are going to be worth the most points, okay, are the most calories. So if you come in here and you want to win and get the most calories, you could take all the really big ones, and that would be kind of a strategy to go after them. So that would kind of increase the number of calories. But sometimes if you're not very good at collecting them and you have the poor tools, you're gonna take whatever you can get. So whatever you pick up is what you're gonna take, and it doesn't matter what calorie it's worth, okay? So in this experiment, we would, because we're not doing it, we would not know exactly which one, but you could have assigned a certain bead kind of one amount of calories, and they could go after that, okay? When we go over the bird beak that collects, which is best at collecting seed types, it's, obviously this depends on a couple different things, but it tends to be spoons and kind of forks. I think if I actually did this experiment, this would probably be one of the best because I can take a lot of seeds all at once. And one of the big things I want to kind of explain is that in this experiment, what we do is we do these different rounds, and if you don't collect enough calories, then you basically die out. So what that's showing is that certain beak types are going to be more successful and will live longer, okay, which means that they'll actually be able to go to the different rounds. So if you have a beak that you're really good with and you can collect a lot, maybe this one would move on, but maybe the tweezers would die the first round because it wasn't able to collect enough seeds. And so this is showing this idea of fitness where certain individuals are going to be able to live and last and survive longer, have a lot of offspring, and then they'll survive to the next generation. So this kind of shows that in how we do this experiment, okay? Now, when you're looking at seed types, so for example, if we do, let me just talk a little bit about seeds. So let's just pretend that we have 4 different seed types. So we have kidney beans, we have corn, we have peas, and rice. Okay, so this is actually what we use in the lab. And we kind of go through the different steps of this experiment. And maybe one of these seed types is really easy to pick up and basically are collected, kind of almost all of them are collected at the end of each of the rounds. What that means is that those different plants that are going to grow from those will be affected the next generation. Okay, because if you eat all of the kidney beans, meaning you've collected all the kidney beans, for the next generation, there won't be any kidney beans. Let's say that you eat half of the corn. So that means that, some of them are going to survive to the next generation. So you will have some corn. Let's just say that peas are pretty easy to get. You also get some peas. And let's say rice are super difficult to get, you could have some rice. And so if you kind of are able to collect all of one type, they're not going to be present in the next generation. And so when you look at the bird beaks, we're thinking about, well, how are the birds surviving? But also, how are the plants affected? Okay, because if we eat all of one type, if all the birds come in and eat every single pea, there's not going to be any peas for the next generation because those peas are going to turn into new pea plants. Okay, so you always have to kind of think about both what are happening to the birds. So birds that are successful can eat a lot of seeds, will do well, we'll have lots of babies, there'll be more of them the next season. Plants, if these are eaten at a really high rate, specifically, let's just say the kidney beans could go extinct in that one little area because they've been eaten and they're not able to then produce new offspring. Okay, and so the second experiment is kind of how the birds affect the plants. So it's a very similar experiment, except this time you have to kind of figure out each time how many plants are going to go on to the next generation. So if you eat a lot of one of the specific types of plants, seeds, they're not going to show up in a very high amount the next time. And so it requires a little more calculation, and the lab will go over that, kind of how you do this. That is complicated, and it's a little more difficult for us to explain kind of over video. It'd be easier to actually have some numbers. My biggest suggestion is just to kind of look over the lab PowerPoint and try to go through the different steps. But what I want to talk to you on here is kind of big picture types of things. Okay, so if we, for example, if we have, let's go back to our beads. So let's just say we go through and one time we go through every single big one of these crystals is taken out, which means that the next season, so let's just pretend these are seeds, the next season there would be none of these left because these were eaten. These are seeds, they would produce a new plant. And so these are gone. And then only these would be left. Okay, what if we come in here and we take many of the purple ones? So maybe we only leave 2 of these purple ones left. Only those 2 are going to be able to make offspring for the next season. And so there's going to be some, but not very many. Okay, and let's just say that these ones are really hard to catch. Maybe these are going to be the ones that you see a lot of the next season because it's hard to pick them up. Okay, and so that's how it's affecting the plants themselves. Okay, so these questions again are very specific to the experiment, but the main thing to know is that the abundance of different plants will change over the course of the season. So if you have birds that are going after a specific resource and they deplete it, which means they eat all of it, that resource is gone for the next season, okay? And maybe they move on and move somewhere else, or maybe they have to switch what they're eating, okay? So I know that's kind of rushed, but kind of the big picture idea of these 2 experiments, I think hopefully you'll be able to kind of take what I've said here and also what you see on the PowerPoint. Now, the last activity is all about Darwin's finches, kind of actual experiments that have been done on Darwin's finches. And what happens is that on the Galapagos Islands, you have these kind of years that are wet years, and then we have drought years. Okay, so low rainfall, high rainfall. And we have these 2 scientists, and this is also going to be on, there's a video that I want you to watch on the lab supplement, and also there's some information in your lab. But we have Peter and Rosemary Grant, and what they did is they went to the Galapagos Islands and studied all of the Galapagos finches, and they took measurements of their beaks, so they would kind of get the beaks, they'd measure them and see, how tall are they, how deep are they, and they took these and they tagged all the individuals. And so what they were able to do is that over a series of years, so this is kind of a very long-term study, they were able to track the average beak size. And so right here we have from 1977 to 1985, the average beak size on specific islands, okay? And I think they weren't on every single island. And these are actually hypothetical data, but these are similar to what they found. And so what we know is that kind of they came up with these kind of outcomes that they saw that had to do with how much rainfall there was. And so when it was wet, the plants would produce kind of many small seeds and kind of lots of them. So small seeds are very abundant. So small seeds abundant. Okay. We have other plants that produce large seeds. And these do well in the wet as well. There's less of the large seeds compared to the small seeds. So in wet seasons, you have a higher proportion of small seeds than you have large seeds. When there's drought years, the plants with small seeds don't do very well. With small seeds don't do well. And there's not very many of them, okay? But the plants for the large seeds, they tend to do fine. Okay, so they're doing good. And so there's a larger proportion of large seeds than there are small seeds. And so what this means is that beak size is going to differ when we have these two events, okay? So small seed plants, so small seeds, are eaten by birds with small beaks. So we have small beak bird. Large seeds can only be eaten by large beaks birds, or big beak birds. Okay? So what happens is that during wet years, on average, the small beaked birds do really, really well. Okay? And it's because there's a lot of small seeds, the small beaked birds do really well. And so they tend to have lots of babies. Okay, so this is, we'll say, wet year. Okay, lots of babies. The large beak birds also have babies, but proportionally, if we look at it, we have more of the small beak birds. Now, when it's a drought, the large seeds are more prevalent and big beak birds do really well. And so when it's drought years, the big beak birds do really well, and so then they have lots of babies. So what that means is that the following year, the average beak size is going to change depending on who is doing well. Okay, so for wet years, the year following, you're gonna tend to have small beaked birds because there was a lot of seeds for them to eat, and then they're gonna have lots of babies. In the drought years, those years, the small beaked birds aren't gonna have as much food to utilize. They're not gonna do as well. They won't have as many babies. And so the big beak birds are actually gonna be the ones that do well. And so the average beak size will increase, okay? So we're gonna have bigger, actually, let me just write this over. Okay, so we have wet year, dry, or drought. Okay, so big beak birds do well. Lots of babies. Average beak size increases. Okay, wet years, the big beak birds do fine, but the small beak birds do really well. Lots of babies. And because beak size is hereditary, they inherit it, the babies are gonna have small beaks. These babies are gonna have large beaks. So lots of babies, okay? And then we're gonna have the average beak size is gonna decrease. Because if we're taking kind of we're looking at every single bird on the island, if there's more of them that are small beak birds, that's going to tend to make the average beak size decrease. And if we're after a year that's really dry and there's lots of babies for the big beak birds, that's going to tend to make the average increase. Okay, and so this is one of the most important topics that you need to understand for this lab, because this is going to be the kind of stuff that we can test you on. It's really hard for us to test you on the experiment with this because you didn't actually do it. But this is a lot easier to kind of just talk about because it doesn't involve an experiment that we are doing, but an experiment that's already been done. Okay, so hopefully this gives you a little more information about Lab 9. My suggestion is to go through, look at all the slides, watch the video that is posted on one of the slides, and then watch this video kind of help you with it. Don't get too bogged down in worrying about how to fill out these graphs. It's really too bad that we can't do this experiment, but it's just the way it goes. So follow the instructions on the PowerPoint. It does go through how you would do this. For this lab, we don't actually have a lab assignment that's due, but you do want to make sure that you understand this information, okay? When we take a quiz on this lab, the things I really want you to focus on are going to be kind of details about Darwin and his voyages, and more about kind of the Darwin's Finches experiment with the grants, okay? Thank you.